Honestly, the best person that I think would have been an excellent president would have been Ron Paul. It was very heartbreaking for me to hear his final speech in 2012 when he retired, announced his retirement as a congressman who has served for 47 years because, he was really fighting for the middle class. He wanted their best interest at heart, and he did everything in his power to make sure that the Federal Reserve was going to be shut down. Article 8, Section 1 specifically says that it's Congress's job to coin money, promote welfare, and pass taxes, promote taxes and general welfare and what have you. Coin money, of course, which is Old English for making copies of currency instead of making money out of thin air like the Federal Reserve does, as well as every central bank around the world. Now, now this was a guy who what he this was a guy who just so happened to have the best voting record. He voted against the war in Iraq. He voted against the Patriot Act. He voted against the National Defense Authorization Act, which was passed under the Obama administration, which was meant to detain someone indefinitely without a due process in court. And and of course, like I said, he wanted to put an end to the Federal Reserve. His plan was to audit the Fed. And and this guy was more forefather material than any other person, and he knew the Constitution like the back of his hand better than anybody else. Now, you can't say that about George Herbert Walker Bush, George Bush Sr. You cannot say this about Obama. You can't say this about the Clintons because they are very anti-America. And and as far as securing the border, yeah, he would have wanted a strong border and a strong nation. And he was also against the idea of having more American embassies built overseas. We have too many of that, and he was against the idea of reckless deficit spending, which was doing more harm than good for the economy and for the country. And he was also against the idea of going to more wars with other countries, which was going to result in more not only more debt in the country, but this is going to be more costly for the government in terms of reparations. This guy was actually anti-war, and he wanted the Americans to have their constitutional rights preserved, and he saw the madness that was going on. Oh, not to mention when it comes to Ron Paul, he predicted and he warned the public about the 9/11 attacks since 1998. 1998, he was telling people about the 9/11 attacks that was going to ensue in 2001. So this comes to show you right there that this man was the real deal. So this is why Ron Paul is somebody I would have definitely voted for as president of the United States. I still have his T-shirt. I still have a T-shirt that says Ron Paul 2012 Save the Republic. I still have that T-shirt. And this guy was such a big threat, and his revolution was actually getting big. I mean, in the Ron Paul movement, that's never gonna die because he never sold out. Bernie Sanders had a good movement going on for him, but after he endorsed Hillary Clinton, who was a puppet of the establishment, his movement instantly died. Everybody left the Bernie Sanders bandwagon, and people compared Bernie Sanders to Ron Paul. That was a big disappointment because he's never going to be like Ron Paul. Ron Paul never sold out. Bernie Sanders did. And honestly, and this is why Ron Paul was forefather material. He was very much against the establishment, but he was censored so heavily in the mainstream media to the point where not many people know who he is. And and they even claimed that Rick Perry was ahead of him in the 2012 election, despite the fact that he actually won and got the majority of the votes in Iowa in 2012. They said that he got last place and he was even behind Rick Perry. Rick Perry was the first guy to drop out of the race. So I don't see how this guy was I don't know why he was censored like that, but no one has ever censored Donald Trump for the things that he said. But when it comes to guys like Ron Paul, because he said he wanted to put an end to the Federal Reserve, the mainstream media saw this guy as a threat. But there's one good thing that came out of Ron Paul's loss. More political parties, besides Democrats and Republicans, are now getting more recognition and more attention in the mainstream media. I think that's the only good thing that came out of it. I mean, this is why you saw Jill Stein and Gary Johnson representing different parties making an appearance more so in the mainstream media, like on CNN and Fox. So I think it's definitely safe to say that the only real pup person out there who actually would have been perhaps the last real president, the real American at heart, was definitely Ron Paul. Ron Paul was the best. I mean, it would be great if his brother, Wayne Paul, started to run for president. He's very knowledgeable, just like his brother Ron Paul. And I think it's safe to say that these guys are also against the New World Order, which is something Ross Perot in 1992 during the election campaign with George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton, when George H.W. Bush was talking about how good and beneficial the New World Order was going to be, Ross Perot was the only man who actually said, that the New World Order would not be a good thing. And during the 90s, Ross Perot, he was the Ron Paul of my generation in the 90s. Ross Perot, he was the Ron Paul of the 1990s. And if he was elected, the country would have been much better off. The only true heroes who are against the establishment that I can think of right now are Ron Paul, Ross Perot, and Jesse Ventura. I don't agree with everything Jesse Ventura says, but let's not forget, Jesse Ventura, I mean, not only is he sharp, but he's against the establishment. That's why he would never be a puppet of the establishment at all whatsoever. And he's not a sellout. I mean, this is the guy who actually became governor and mayor of Minnesota. And he spent only $300,000 for his campaign. Democrats and Republicans, they spent a whopping $25 million combined just to try to become governor or mayor of Minnesota. But they lost. And Jesse Ventura was the victor. And, and honestly, this is why I think Ron Paul would have been a great, great president if he wasn't censored in the media, and if more people actually heard and paid attention to him. And they would have known about him if they just looked him up on the internet. The people are just too busy watching the election. But you see, Ron Paul was a colossal giant who was really the hope of restoring the republic. And people were too blind to see how great of a man that he was. The Ron Paul revolution, I'm still going to be on that movement, on that bandwagon. The Ron Paul movement, the Ron Paul revolution, it will never die. It will forever be immortalized. Because it is a movement of people who are educated and awake to the disaster of the New World Order. And only a few people who are celebrities actually, supported him. Jon Stewart from The Daily Show, as well as Jay Leno. These were guys that actually supported and they loved Ron Paul. And they even had Ron Paul come, Jay Leno even had Ron Paul come to his show. But one thing is for sure, the only person who is not a puppet, who will never be a sellout, I can think of right now is Jesse Ventura. Now, if he runs, I will definitely vote for him. Because he's not going to be a sellout to the establishment like Hillary Clinton whatsoever. Now, Ross Perot, he was the Ron Paul of the 90s. And Ron Paul was definitely the man and the beacon of hope. The United States of America had a giant right in front of them. But they saw right through him as if he didn't even exist because he was censored so heavily in the media. It breaks my heart that Ron Paul will never become president of the United States because of the censorship that is all over the mainstream media. As a matter of fact, his son was censored in the mainstream media when he was running for president. His son was censored. So, I mean, I was really hoping that Rand Paul would be a step closer, but Ron Paul will definitely be the best. Um, I will always have love for Ron Paul. He was definitely the best guy, and he was more forefather material than anybody else. I mean, he wasn't even afraid to say that Democrats and Republicans are the same. This guy was, he wasn't anti-Muslim. He definitely wasn't anti-gay because he couldn't care less about what they do in their personal life. And he was against the idea of government being interfering in the marriages of people, because when people get married, I mean, this actually involves the government. He was actually against that. He was actually against the unconstitutional things that the Pentagon has been doing. So he went as far as to say, we're this close to putting an end to the Federal Reserve. Now let's end the Pentagon. Now that was very bold and brave of him. Nobody's going to be more brave than Ron Paul. And the only two people who I could say are just as brave as him are Ross Perot and Jesse Ventura. Because they're not a part of the establishment. They don't want to be a part of the establishment, and they're not sellouts at all whatsoever. Nobody will ever be as great as those guys. But if Ron Paul ever comes back, I will be ready to vote for him. He is the man that gave me hope, and he is the man that actually inspired me to be a brave person, to stand out from the crowd as different and unique, and he actually inspired me to be a better American. This is why I will always love Ron Paul from the bottom of my heart, and he is the best person that has ever lived in the United States. Now, if we had another Ross Perot and a Ron Paul, then I think America will have the best president it has ever had. Since we've had a brave president like JFK calling out the mainstream media and exposing secret societies. We need that again. But we don't have that. And I don't think we ever will for a very long time. So stay tuned. Peace.